When we started the church about 5 years ago, we just decided that we were going to talk about Bible prophecy a lot, that it was a subject that very few churches were doing, and God's blessed that part of our ministry. God's blessed all of our ministry. We've had people come to know the Lord through all aspects of our ministry, which is really important. And then, we know of churches that are taking our sermons and Bible teachings and using them in home fellowship churches in about 10 countries. Somebody wrote in one of the Baltic states and says we have a number of groups that meet here and use the teachings we get from your church. And it was never our intent. It was a real God thing that it worked out. Did anybody think it was like a short night last night? This is my wife put this on our Facebook page. This is they had to set the clocks ahead at Stonehenge. So it's praise the Lord for digital stuff, huh? So just where I'll be over the next week, Wednesday I'm going to be down at Blessed Hope Chapel in Simi Valley, California, and then I'm doing a conference with a bunch of other guys in Sacramento next weekend called One of Messiah. I think my sessions I'm speaking at are on Saturday. You can get us fbchapel.com. If you want to watch, there are live stream links there that you can watch live. That would mean out here in California, you're getting up pretty early in the morning. So we usually finish up about 9:15 or so, theoretically, whenever I get done. And sometimes it goes a little bit longer. And I'll tell everybody if you need to get up and leave, go ahead and leave. You won't offend me because I'm used to it. And if you want to see us on YouTube, just type in FB Chapel or John Haller. I talk a lot about Israel. I mentioned the first hour that Pam and I were there last year, and either in Simi Valley or up in Sacramento, I'm going to talk some about, and I mentioned this a little bit in passing, but I didn't go into depth the way I wanted to. I'm going to talk about one of this find that took place, and here in that area, the red area, that's the Temple Mount. This is the southern area. This is where the steps were. A lot of archaeological expedition digs going on there, and in this area of the Ophel that I've outlined in red, they discovered 2 years ago. They discovered a seal, and on it, as they had it for a while, and then they went back and looked at it, and they figured out the name on it was Ezekiel Ahud. Ezekiel, the son of Ahud, and then below it, it said, the king of Judah. And it's just a little tiny seal, but it confirms the truth of the Bible. Hezekiah, the king, when Sennacherib came down from Assyria and went through 46 cities, according to his own records that he put on his prism that you can find in several different museums. 46 cities were taken over, and he got to Jerusalem, and all the people, really it was the remnant. The city of Jerusalem expanded greatly. You can go to Jerusalem today and you can see part of Ezekiel's broad wall that he did when they expanded the city to the western hill. And the city served as sort of a sheepfold. And we know the story that the king Sennacherib came, and there was a prophet in Judah at the time named Isaiah. We talked about Isaiah in the first hour. And Isaiah came to Hezekiah and prophesied that the Lord was going to protect Jerusalem. And we know the story. Sennacherib came, and one night, the angel of the Lord slew 185,000 Assyrians. Now, Sennacherib never recorded that. It was just sort of like, I went and took over 46 cities of Israel and Judah, and then I went home. Because he's not going to talk about the bad news. Even back in those days, media was kind of fake. And, but what's interesting, about 2 weeks ago, they announced that 10 feet away from where they found the Hezekiah seal, they found this. And although the name is not complete, they're pretty sure that this is a seal of a guy named Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, who was the prophet in Jerusalem talking to Hezekiah at the time Hezekiah used his seal. It's pretty amazing. You can go there and you can see these things. We've been to Israel, and I talk a lot about Israel because it is very prophetically significant. I found this graphic the other day. This kind of gives you an idea of the lay of the land. Now, the one thing I noticed when we were in Israel and we were going to these tells, these are hills that are built up over time, and they do archaeological digs. I actually found this on a cult website, Jehovah's Witness website, but it's actually very accurate. So you just want you to, don't go there and read the theology, just go for the pictures, okay? And, but as we went to Israel in May last year, and we walked around, I told my wife, it's like, and our guide, I said, it's like, everything's uphill here. It seems like everywhere I went, I had a much bigger hill to walk back up than I had walked down previously. But this gives you an idea of the lay of the land. You have the lowest spot on earth, the shore of the Dead Sea, coming up through the Jordan Valley. You see the Sea of Galilee. Actually, I have a little laser pointer that I can use. Here is the Sea of Galilee right here. And going up to Lake Hula. Sea of Galilee itself is about 700 feet below sea level. So when you're driving down this big hill, it says you've now reached sea level, and you still have quite a ways to go down to get to the level of the Sea of the Galilee. And then you notice that it goes all the way up to Mount Hermon. And when it says in Matthew that Jesus went up into a high mountain, that's where he went. He went up to Mount Hermon. And that mountain has a lot of significance, both prophetically and stories that are biblical, Bible and Bible related. And then in the middle, you see Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. There's a valley between those two, and in that valley lies the biblical city of Shechem. And we went to Shechem, and I think it's tragic. When we were at Shechem, when we were at Shiloh, when we were at Hebron, or at Tel Rumedia, for the most part, it was Pam and I and Joel Kramer, our guide. Nobody else was there. And it's hard because the tours have to get bulletproof buses, bulletproof glass in their buses, special armed guards and everything, special insurance to go into these areas. Jews aren't allowed to go. But there in that natural valley it's a natural amphitheater. Ebal and Gerizim, the Samaritans lived on top of Gerizim. Remember when Jesus met the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well? You can go to Jacob's well today. It's a very deep well, just like the Bible describes. There's a Greek Orthodox church built over it, but you drop something down in there and it takes about 4.5 seconds before it hits the water. So that's a deep well. It's at least about probably 200, 250 feet deep before you get to the water. So the Samaritan woman was there, and when she said, well, you people, you Jews, you worship in that mountain, and we worship in that mountain. And she points, right there is Mount Gerizim, and there's a Samaritan temple up there. And to this day, they study the Torah. They use a form of Hebrew that they've only found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's fairly ancient. And they do Passover probably more faithful to the Torah than the Jews do. And there's about 700 Samaritans left today. And Joel did a video about that called The Sacrifice, if you want to look that up. And so in that natural amphitheater, just real quickly, Joshua gathered the people of Israel. And on Mount Ebal, they shouted the blessings that would occur to Israel if they kept the laws of God. And on Mount Gerizim, they shouted the curses. No, I take it back. I have it reversed. Gerizim was the blesses. Ebal, where they built the altar, where they found the altar, was where they shouted the curses. And it wasn't just a few people. It was probably over 1 million people on each mountain shouting this. And you can go there today and you can get a good idea of the lay of the land. And then just around the corner is a tomb of a guy. When they came back from Egypt, they carried his bones and they buried there in Shechem a guy named Joseph. This is looking at it from east, like to west, and you see where Jerusalem is and Jericho, about 800 feet below sea level. So when the Bible says Jesus was in Jericho and he went up to Jerusalem, he went up to Jerusalem. We drove that road many years ago, and it is up. It is very steep, very narrow. And so the land really, the lay of the land tells you so much about Israel. And I'm going to talk about that. I'll talk a little bit, like I said, either in Simi Valley or in Sacramento this week, about the significance of Samaria as it relates to, I think, Bible prophecy and what we see going on and unfolding in the Holy Land. So I do each week, I do a prophecy update. And what I do is I look at current events and through a biblical lens as, okay, what are the things that the Bible says is going to be happening in the last days and what's going on in the world? Now, I'm not doing that to necessarily say that this is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but what we see is the world coming together exactly like the prophets said. And when you see these things, Jesus talked about this, when you see these things begin to happen, what do? You look up because your redemption is drawing nigh. And there's an urgency about these things, and a lot of us that study this, and I praise the Lord that you have a pastor that looks at this too and studies it and takes it seriously, is things are coming together. Does anybody, look around. And I always look, I try to get quotes from secular people a lot of times, because when these secular people are talking about things that the Bible talked about, and they're going like here's the cover of Foreign Policy magazine from a couple years ago, a world disrupted, and there's an explosion behind it. Now, foreign policy are a bunch of foreign policy wonks and academics and that type of thing. But when the secular world is talking about the things that are described in the Bible, it's time, I think, for the church to take notice of this and say, hey, we should pay attention to what's going on. There was a group of people, the sons of Issachar in the Old Testament, and they were what? They were found more noble. Why? Because they understood the times in which they live. And we need to be like the sons of Issachar and understand the times in which we live. Look, I'm an attorney in a large law firm, and I've had people come into my office in my law firm and say, what is going on in the world? The world is like falling apart. Is this the end of the world? Now, my usual response is, are you sure you really want to be asking me that question? Because you might be here for a while. Here's the current issue of foreign policy. Can we fix this? And so the world believes, and a large chunk of what claims to be the Christian church believes that we're going to do everything so great, we're going to build this great world, and everything will be great, and then Jesus will want to come back. That's a very predominant view in evangelicalism today. How's it going? And I say, I talk to people that believe that, and I'm like, you do realize that the church has been around for 2,000 years, and if that's what we're supposed to do, we haven't even got one town so far that we've been able to put in anything in place that is like what the kingdom of God described in Scripture is. So maybe that means that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And they usually don't have a response. One of the things I talk about, and I will confess that some of this stuff is that I talk about is kind of geeky. And so I see things like a foreign policy comes out 2050 with a lens and a bunch of people in it. And the whole issue was about demography. And so I was really geeking out when this one came out, because it's one thing that I think a lot of people ignore when they're talking about Bible prophecy and the convergence of events. And as things converge, like the vortex in a tornado, as you get kind of closer to that vortex, what happens? There's a lot of turbulence, right? So in that turbulence, that's the way the world's going to be before the Lord comes back. And it's going to get increasing, and the wind speed's going to pick up. And one of the things a lot of people ignore is, and why I think we're getting into that time, very close to it, is the demography just doesn't work out. Western populations are collapsing. If you lived in a state where large pensions have been promised to public employees, like California, you should worry about the demography. This is where they think the fertility rates are going to increase. Look at Africa, Central and Southern Africa. This is the distribution of population. The red is Africa. So from 2010 to 2050, you see what happens? And what happens to Europe? Their slice of the pie gets smaller. Why? Because they don't have babies. In order for your population to maintain itself, you have to have babies. They're not having babies in Europe. Russia, some of the worst countries are Spain and Russia. They're having about 1.1 child per female. You need 2.1 to just keep even because of death rates and all that stuff. So that means in one generation, Russia is half the population. Do you understand why Vladimir Putin is running around putting all these things in place right now? Whether he's bright or not, he does understand a little bit about what's going on and what's coming for Russia. And why he's involved in Syria, I'll talk about it in just a minute. But part of the reason he's involved in Syria is because he has a Sunni Muslim problem. Do you know that now the Sunni Muslim population of Moscow is 25% of the city? Do you know that the Russian army will, probably by the middle of the next decade, be over 50% Muslim? Think about that. Here are fertility rates, and you see, for example, here's Africa. You see how Africa's fertility rates are rapidly increasing. Here is population estimates. So you see the largest countries, China, India, United States. So you go down to 2050, you have India, then China. China stays level over the next 40 years. What, is that good? Well, not for China, because why? Because their fertility rates are collapsing. By the way, if you look at the demography there's this prophecy, depending on how you interpret it, the kings of the East in Revelation, they come, and it talks about an army of 200 million. Now, there's a lot of controversy about that, what is, but let's just say that that's a literal prophecy. There will be an army come from the East that will have 200 million people in it. Do you know that at the current birth rates, very soon, in China and India combined, which are what direction from Israel? East. They will have 200 million men because they kill female babies, they abort them. They will have 200 million men that don't have a spouse, opportunity for a spouse. What do you think that's going to do to society? Do you think that they could come up with put people in an army to invade? I think they could. Here is an interesting graphic on aging. These are millions of people in their population. The one at the top is Japan. People over the age of 65, they go from, in 35 years, they almost double the number of people over the age of 65. I've been told, I haven't been able to confirm it, but don't take it as the gospel truth. I'm told that more adult diapers are sold in Japan now than children diapers. That's coming to America. It's coming to Europe, it's coming to Russia. And it has huge prophetic implications because it means that some of these countries that are prophesied in the end times, I think, it's just another thing that makes the window even shorter. Here's the one I talked about, dependency, fewer dependents for every 100. So how many people do you need how many people are supported by 100 workers. So right now in 2010 in Nigeria, it was 88. By 2050, they're going to have a high birth rate. They'll have more population in Nigeria than the United States if the Lord doesn't return by 2050. And they'll have 69 people dependent on 100 workers. But look at the bottom of this chart. Look at Japan. It's 57 now. By 2050, it'll be 96. That means all those big public employee pensions and that type of thing are going to have to be paid by one person, for one person. It's not sustainable. It will cause collapse. I think it's going to cause economic collapse. And probably the worst two states in the United States are Illinois and California. I've done some reading about California. Some of the public employee pensions, you know what it would cost you have to invest in California to pay the pension of someone that retires with a high pension from the state government? You would have to put $2 million in a bank account now to pay what they will earn over their lifetime. And people are living longer. So now you have people that work for 30 years and they're retired for 45. Is that sustainable? It's not. And nobody talk. By the way, I'm not again. I love California, but you have crazy people in charge. What Governor Brown said in response to Attorney General Sessions' lawsuit about sanctuary cities the other day was incoherent. Send him home, to a home. The mayor of Oakland, there's a scale. There's like idiot, imbecile, and moron. Okay, morons are smarter than imbeciles. So I'm not sure where she falls on the scale, but it's not moron. It's incoherent. I watched their news conferences in response to that lawsuit, and it's just, they can't reason. This is what Romans chapter 1 says, I will give them over to a reprobate mind. It means that they can't reason. Actually, in 1 Corinthians, it talks about, it's essentially one way of looking at the verses, God morons the world. He gives them over. And do we see that happening now? People, these supposedly smart people in charge of everything what are they thinking? Are they thinking? How do they get that way? Look at this. These are sort of the nice population curve was there were a lot of babies, some more kids in school, and it was a nice bell curve. It increased as you went over. So that's why they could do things like Social Security, because they had a lot of people to pay for the people that were retired. And it's changed. This is what it used to be like here, and now here's Asia. It's not a bell curve anymore. It's a honeycomb. So there's too many people trying to get too many public benefits, and it just doesn't work. Here's Latin America, Europe. Look at Europe. So they have a lot fewer babies. North America is flat almost all the way to the top. And then this is Oceania. So all of these statistics, I just think it's one thing that people do not understand. Here's another one. There was a recent debate by a couple friends of mine. Bill Salas, who believes that Mystery Babylon is Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. Joel Richardson, who believes it's Mecca or this new Neom city that'll be built, and or Mecca, and Islam is the religion of the Antichrist. The Antichrist will come from the Islamic world. And my position is I love everybody. I don't want to fight about it. We'll see how it plays out. I'm open to all of this. Actually, I think they're both right. There's a thing that's in place. By the way, I just saw this on the front page of the LA Times yesterday. Where do you cross the bullet train that comes through Bakersfield? It's not here yet, is it? They just increased the cost again, and they've moved the finish date out to, I think, 2033 or so 2035. So that's a boondoggle, isn't it? I personally think that this end-time beast empire system There's some people talking about it, Trevor Loudon and other people. It's the Red-Green Alliance. Communist, socialist is the red, Islam is the green. Because you notice that the socialists, the leftists in our government, they never really complain about Islam, do they? They like ignore it. And I'm glad that we now have a president that at least will say the word. Have you had Phil Haney here? Oh, you have? Okay. Phil's a good friend. And you know what he went through because he was telling the truth about Islam. This is a study I just saw this morning. Making Citizens, How American Universities Teach Civics. Look at what the findings are of this. They studied the curriculum at University of Colorado, at Boulder, Colorado State University, University of Northern Colorado, and University of Wyoming. Middle America. Okay, I don't know if they factored in the pot smoking that goes on in Colorado now. I was there last year. It's stunning. I mean, you go to a fast food place and the people, they're stoned. I don't know how else to say it. And they want to do that all over the country. How's it going to work? It is God is moroning the world, and he's giving people over to a reprobate mind. Look at this. Traditional civic literacy is in deep decay in America. Does this sound like the schools in California? Public schools? I mean, look, even Christian colleges and universities are falling into this trap. Here's another finding. The new civics, a movement devoted to progressive activism, has taken over civics education. Service learning and civic engagement are the most common labels this movement uses, but it also calls itself global civics, deliberative democracy, and intercultural learning. The new civics movement is national and extends far beyond the universities. Dennis Prager has a lawsuit against Google because his Prager University keeps getting censored. He'll put up a video about, it'll be Alan Dershowitz, who's a man of the left, well, really a traditional liberal, talking about something, and they'll put it on the restricted age list like it's pornography. And Google and Facebook are censoring Christian websites. I have friends whose websites have been taken down. We are trying to develop, there's a number of people trying to develop alternative platforms, so things like what is said here, what we say at Fellowship Bible Chapel and elsewhere, will have a place that people can access online. And my recommendation is go buy a big hard drive and download the stuff of people that you like. It's easy to do, and save it in case they shut the internet down and you want to have some good Bible teaching or fellowship or try to understand what's going on. We've lost the schools. The new civics redefines civic activity as progressive activism. It redefines civic activity as channeling government funds toward progressive nonprofits. That sounds like the emergent church. I mean, a lot of these churches come out and they want to support immigration. Then you start looking at, what's the old saying, follow the money. And what you find is they're getting so much per head of for these immigrants that come in. And I'm not against immigration. You know, my family came from, one side of my family came from Bavaria, which a German friend told me was like the Kentucky of Germany. So, okay, whatever. And at least we were smart enough to get out of Germany. You know what they say about Germany and geopolitics? Germany is always wrong. But Angela Merkel this week came out and said, guess what? This immigration's a problem. She essentially admitted that there are no-go zones in Germany where the police will not go because of what will happen to the police. People were saying this for years. So eventually the truth does catch up to people. But anyway, so you can find that study online. There's a guy named Daniel Greenfield. He's got this, he's an Orthodox Jew. He lives in Los Angeles. He writes for Front Page Magazine. He also writes for his own blog called Sultan Kanish. And he's very brilliant, very good writer, conservative. I find there's a lot of good conservative Jewish writers and thinkers because I think God gives them insight, even though they're not believers in Messiah yet. And he's very bright, and he's talking about, you know, Trump is at least maybe trying to put the brakes or burn down this censorship that's going on all of these websites, these public websites. And I don't understand why, if somebody can go into a Christian bakery and make you make a cake about a gay wedding, why can they shut you down on YouTube for your religious views? It sounds like discrimination to me. And there are lawsuits going, and there's some talk going on with people about fighting this. Another thing that he talks about, this investigation with Trump, is they're now relying on testimony from people in Qatar to go after Trump in the Mueller investigation. Qatar is the big funder for an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. And you would know more about that since you heard Phil. Here's what Daniel says in this article. But Qatar these days is far more of a threat than it was on 9/11. Its close ties to terror have made it a pariah nation in the region, even as its support for Islamic theocracy crosses all factional lines. It is the main patron of the Muslim Brotherhood, an international jihadist network, and has close ties to Iran. It spreads terrorist propaganda through Al Jazeera while subverting friendly governments. It seeks to influence American policy through think tanks like Brookings while spying on America. So that's why Brookings, Mueller, Brookings, Al Jazeera, CNN are on this picture of a jihadist. He actually looks like one of the emirs of Qatar. This happens in the church. One of the things that Jesus talked about was deception in the end times. 2 Timothy chapters 3 and 4, it talks about people will get teachers who what? Tickle their ears. And there's stark warnings. Jeremiah 23 is a whole chapter. We mentioned Ezekiel today, and Ezekiel 34, who had a prophecy against the shepherds. Jeremiah 23 is the theme of that is, woe to the pastors who just tell my people good things. There's a story in the Old Testament about a prophet named Micaiah at the time of Ahab. And the king of Judah, I'm not going to remember who he is at the time, but now that I'm thinking about it, I won't remember. But the king of Judah was told by the prophets, if you go to battle, you'll win. And there were 400 prophets that told the king that. And the king went to Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom, and said, what do you think? He goes, well, there's this other guy. Do you have any other prophets? Because I'm just not sure. I got a bad feeling about this, I think is what he was thinking. So like, there's Micaiah, but he hates me. He always gives me bad news. And so you got to get an idea from that story. You had 400 false prophets to one true prophet, Micaiah. And that's probably a ratio that at least holds, at a minimum, 400 false prophets to one true prophet even today. It's just the way it works out. But this is a new movie that just came out. It actually has a lot of Bible quotes and that type of thing. It's called A Wrinkle in Time. This is the current resident goddess of Santa Barbara, who's in the movie, Oprah. She doesn't get to play God in this movie. I think that's her goal, though. And what they do in this movie, though, is even though there was Christian references, it was sort of a liberal Christian book and had Christian references, all the good people from history and Christianity and the Bible and everything have been excised from the movie. It just came out the other day. But, not to worry, they have a ministry resources page so you can go get a study guide for your church to study the movie A Wrinkle in Time. Have you downloaded this yet? If he does, fire him. Yes, in the movie there is ministry resources, film clips and everything so you can be culturally relevant to the culture today. And is this what pastors do? I'm going to play a clip, just a short bit of a clip, and you have a discerning pastor, I know from talking to him and spending time with him. And this pastor spoke this week. His name is Dan Fusco. He's pastor of Calvary Chapel, Vancouver, Washington. This was at the Southwest Pastors and Leaders Conference for Calvary Chapel Pastors and Leaders in Tucson this week. This is part of what he said.
How does that happen? Because you build a bridge. So first you start by building bridges. Now notice what he does next. He says this. since he is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things.
He's preaching from Acts 17.
From one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. Now, I want you to notice that what the Apostle Paul does is he does not get into theological minutia. He gives them a God-drenched view of their lives. Now here's the thing. For those of you who preach all the time, your theological minutia is for your study, not really for your people. I learned this because growing up in the Calvary movement, especially in the later generations, there was a lot more of what we were against than what we were for. A lot of it. I was always hearing how Calvinism is bad. This is bad. This thing is bad. Rick Warren is bad. All this stuff. Now what's amazing is if you ever met Rick Warren, anyone who says Rick Warren is bad is stupid. If you sit in a room with him, that dude is brilliant. I sat across from him, and he downloaded sermon notes to me. It was, I'm like, he's just like it says in 1 Corinthians 15, whole outlines. I'm like, but you know what I realized? When you listen to a lot of theological minutia, someone trying to justify a secondary or a tertiary position, that finds its way into your sermons. And guess what? Somebody who's just trying to figure out how to make it through tomorrow does not care a rip about that. They don't care. They're just trying, how do I keep my marriage together? How do I keep my kids off of heroin? How do I pay my bills? And you're trying to explain to me the intricacies of the post-tribulation rapture? Is that really necessary? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't go there, but if that is what you really talk about, it makes sense when people go to Oprah or Dr. Oz instead of the church.
Okay, did I understand him correctly? If you teach theology, you're going to drive people, they're just going to go to Oprah and Dr. Oz because they're going to get what they want there. So you're not doing your job if you teach theology and doctrine. You have a pastor, I know, and we try to do it at Fellowship Bible Chapel, is to teach the whole counsel of God. Yeah, I mean, you want your kids to get off heroin, stay off heroin, infuse them with the Word of God. Get them saved. It's the only hope for humanity. And what I'm almost without words as I watch this tripe that this man is putting out, telling people that theological minutia. Now, I don't want to say it's wrong. He just said it was wrong. You see the passive-aggressive nonsense that passes for this emergent, purpose-driven nonsense? It annoys me. And I don't understand why the senior pastors in that audience weren't running from the exits or say, sit down and just be quiet. This was at a pastor's conference. Think about it. It wasn't in a church. And so guys like Andy Stanley and stuff posted, Andy Stanley had said recently, the Old Testament, you don't really need to, it's old. You don't really need it. You can't understand Revelation unless you study the Old Testament, right? I mean, it's everywhere you go. You have to, it's an allusion, 85% of it is an allusion to the Old Testament. It boggles my mind that this goes on. The mysticism that's coming into the church, it's destroying the faith of many. But boy, we told them how to have a better life, and who doesn't want to have a better life? And so we talk about things and we help them have a better life, and they can be better in life. This is almost a direct quote of what Andy Stanley said a couple of years ago, because who doesn't want to be better in life? So we teach them how to have a better life. And we don't worry about all that doctrine and Bible stuff. that theological minutia. But I showed you in the first hour, when Jesus went into the synagogues, people were amazed. Why? At the teaching of his doctrine. So if Jesus did it, it's probably good enough for me. Technology. This is a Palestinian Arab taking a picture of a Israeli policeman, and they're both. I was once in a bad section of Los Angeles, and I was putting gas in my rental car on the way to the airport a couple years ago, and no sooner did I start to pump the gas than all of a sudden, literally 30 pieces of emergency equipment, trucks, policemen, fire trucks, hook and ladder trucks, even though everything was one story in that area of South Los Angeles, came driving up to the intersection. People jumped out with iPads, equipment, and all this stuff, and I thought, am I going to be like the next, what was the guy, Reginald Denny, that got drug out of the truck during the Rodney King riots? I mean, and you know how I knew I was okay? Because nobody was doing this. There was nobody taking a picture of what was going on. So I figured if nobody's taking a picture of it now, that's a good sign that nothing is happening, right? Because, I mean, you look at all these concerts that are online and sports events, and everybody's recording everything. So now there's this technology coming out. This was on the front page of the New York Times this last week. It's only a matter of time. Here comes an act for fake videos, and they can now take pictures of you and video of you, and they can make up a video that's so real you cannot tell what's real. And the example they use is they do a sort of an adult video of Michelle Obama. And now I have not seen this, but the article says you can't tell that it's a fake. What are we going to do in the days and weeks and months ahead when we can't tell what's real? What do we have to do? What will be our anchor? What is the only anchor that we can have then? The truth of the Word of God. As long as we don't have pastors like this guy saying, don't get into the minutia, because people don't want that. You know what the solution is to the fake video apps? You know what somebody is proposing to develop? A way to record everything in your life so that you can prove that I never said that. I mean, this is mark of the beast technology stuff that is happening, and you need to be aware that it's not coming, it's here. I was at a technology conference this week. We talked about the Internet of Things and all the things that are connected to the Internet, and the question was, how many of you have a device other than a smartphone or a computer that has an embedded chip in it that's connected to the Internet? And these were technology lawyers and some from big firms, mega firms, law firms, and only about half the people raised their hands. And the guy said, then he put up this slide and said, okay, how many of you have one of these? And everybody said, oh, well, I have those. I mean, the technology is there. And then the question was, one of the things they talked about, the ethics of using predictive artificial intelligence to determine who's entitled to get say, a kidney transplant. Because we can examine your life and data from your life and things that we have embedded in you, and we can determine, hey, you're only going to live about 20 years because you eat too much ice cream, you don't exercise enough. This person has a chance of living to 70, so we're going to give this person the kidney and, see ya. That's where it's headed. And it's going to get here much more quickly than you can imagine, because the lawyers are talking about it. At the recent Davos conference, I'm going to play a little clip of this. There was a man named Dr. can't remember his first name, Hariri. He's a gay Jewish man, teaches professor in Israel, and he talked about, the title of his talk is, Will the Future Be Human? Will we need humans in the future? Listen to just a little bit of this.
Within a century or two, Earth will be dominated by entities that are more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals or from chimpanzees. Because in the coming generations, we will learn how to engineer bodies and brains and minds. These will be the main products of the economy, of the 21st century economy. Not textiles and vehicles and weapons, but bodies and brains and minds. Now, how exactly
Look at the background.
Future masters of the planet look like? This will be decided by the people who own the data. Those who control the data control the future not just of humanity, but the future of life itself. Because today, data is the most important asset in the world. In ancient times, land was the most important asset. And if too much land became concentrated in too few hands, humanity split into aristocrats and commoners. Then in the modern age, in the last 2 centuries, machinery replaced land as the most important asset. And if too many of the machines became concentrated in too few hands, humanity split into classes, into capitalists and proletariats. Now data is replacing machinery as the most important asset. And if too much of the data becomes concentrated in too few hands, humanity will split not into classes, it will split into species, into different species. Now, why is data so important? It's important because we have reached the point when we can hack not just computers, we can hack human beings and other organisms. There is a lot of talk these days about hacking computers and email accounts and bank accounts and mobile phones, but actually we are gaining the ability to hack human beings. Now, what do you need in order to hack a human being? You need 2 things. You need a lot of computing power, and you need a lot of data, especially biometric data. Not data about what I buy or where I go, but data about what is happening inside my body and inside my brain. Until today, nobody had the necessary computing power and the necessary data to hack humanity. Even if the Soviet KGB or the Spanish Inquisition followed you around everywhere, 24 hours a day, watching everything you do, listening to everything you say, still they didn't have the computing power and the biological knowledge necessary to make sense of what was happening inside your body and brain, and to understand how you feel and what you think and what you want. But this is now changing because of 2 simultaneous revolutions. On the one hand, advances in computer science, and especially the rise of machine learning and AI, are giving us the necessary computing power. And at the same time, advances in biology, and especially in brain science, are giving us the necessary understanding, biological understanding. You can really summarize 150 years of biological research since Charles Darwin in 3 words. Organisms are algorithms. This is the big insight of the modern life sciences, that organisms, whether viruses or bananas or humans, they are really just biochemical algorithms. And we are learning how to decipher these algorithms. Now, when the 2 revolutions merge, when the infotech revolution merges with the biotech revolution, what you get is the ability to hack human beings.
He goes on later in that talk. Did you see the background of Jesus Christ behind him? This is Mark of the Beast type technology. This is man becoming as God. This is replaying the Tower of Babel all over again. And what he said was, you know, eventually, back in the Middle Ages, he's a medieval historian is his background. And so he's taking the lessons he learned from that and applying them to the things that he sees going on. And I believe he's an atheist, although he used a background of Jesus Christ in his slides, which I found kind of odd and strange. But he went on to say, in the Middle Ages, we had serfs. And the serfs at least provided a service to their lords and masters. You know, they took care of the crops and that type of thing. But pretty soon we're going to be to a point where if you don't have the technical skills, there's no reason to keep you around. This was at the World Economic Forum, where the elites of the world gather every year to talk about geopolitics, technology, and other things and what's coming. It's one of the most frightening talks I've ever seen. And I think he's right. And listen, when you add in all the other things going on in the world and then you layer this on top of it, it ought to be, I don't understand why more pastors don't talk about it. Now, maybe they don't have time to watch the Davos forums and record them and everything, but look at what's going on. The information is out there. These technology conferences are all live streamed now. Everything is on the internet. I mean, I sit in my family room in Dublin, Ohio, and I can download all of this information. It doesn't take any great technological skills. But what are we going to do? One of the other forums at this, and this is an interesting one when we talk about the kings of the East and the way things are rising. This was based on a paper by Robert Kaplan, who writes a book on geography and geopolitics. And he's probably leans to the left of the political spectrum, but he's a pretty bright guy. He's written a lot of books. He kind of builds off the work of a guy named Alfred Mackinder, who was the head of the Royal Geographic Society in Britain. And he said that the main area of the world is the Northern European plain. Who controls that plain controls the world island, which is Europe, Asia, Africa all together, which crisscrosses, by the way, through Israel. That's the land bridge for all those. And who controls the world island controls the world. And so that's why you see Vladimir Putin and this conflict in Ukraine, which is a very farming-rich area. I think they have like 8 feet of very rich topsoil in Ukraine. It's a European breadbasket. There's conflict there. There's conflicts in Syria. And Kaplan kind of took a lot, and he looks through this thing. He says this: as Europe disappears, Eurasia coheres. The supercontinent is becoming one fluid, comprehensible unit of trade and conflict as the Westphalian system of states weakens and older imperial legacies, Russian, Chinese, Iranian, Turkish, become paramount. Every crisis from Central Europe to the ethnic Han Chinese heartland is now interlinked. There is one singular battle space. What follows is an historical and geographic guide to it. And he goes through in detail. And you can go to the Davos website and you can watch the panel that Kaplan chaired. I don't have time to play the clips of it tomorrow morning, but he talks about important players in Central Asia, Iran, and Turkey. I can only tell you that as you read through Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, what you find is that important players in that coming invasion against Israel in the last days is Turkey, Iran, and Central Asia. And I think Russia comes along. And it talks about, look, Russia is kind of drug in. I'll put, not a hook, hooks. I'll drag you in, even though you don't want to be there. And now Putin's involved in that area. Turkey is there with their troops. Iran is there with their troops. They have their proxies on the mountains of northern Israel through Hezbollah. They have their proxies in Gaza through Hamas. And so what you see, one of the commentators this week said, what you have in the Middle East now is it used to be Israel had like maybe a threat from the north and maybe a little bit from the south, from Gaza. Now they're coming at them. There's 4 ways to attack Israel: from the Mediterranean through the gas fields, which are yielding enormous amounts of gas, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza. And Israel is being besieged. Does it sound like what the Bible says? It is what the Bible says. And this has really never come together before. There are a number of other things that are going on. This week, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, came out and said, the contemporary triangle of evil comprises Iran, Turkey, and extremist religious groups. That's a pretty stunning statement coming from Saudi Arabia. And so there's this conflict, and it looks like when you look at Ezekiel chapter 38, 39, that D-Dam, which would be modern-day Saudi Arabia, is kind of sitting on the sidelines going, hey, Turkey, Iran, and all you other, what are you doing this? Why are you coming? And it's pretty clear that Turkish troops pushed deeper into northern Syria. These are just some headlines from this week. Europe came in this week, set conditions for recognizing Jerusalem as a capital. Israel has to do these things. Assad regime, this is just some of the headlines from this week. Assad regime accused of apocalypse in Syria. What they're doing is they're driving out the Sunni population. And they get a benefit for that. You know, Putin's sort of, whether he wants to or not, I mean, he's probably making some mistakes, but he's learned how to deal with the Sunni problem that he has. And the Central Asian states are all Sunni. He has issues with that also. Now, let me ask you this. If you were a Russian czar or czar wannabe, and you wanted to squelch Muslim problem that you had in today's contemporary world, is there anything that you could do that might get the Islamic world off of your back? I mean, like, could you say attack a country and the Muslims would say, okay, you do that and we'll leave you alone for a while? Your grandkids might not be happy with what we're going to do to them later, but we'll let you go for, you know, the rest of your life. Putin's probably the richest person in the world right now. But maybe attacking Israel and helping the Islamic countries deal with that problem would be a way for him to get them off his back. Because he's got a problem with it. I told you the statistics earlier, the Democrats. An ex-Syrian general came out this week and says Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, north of Israel, has chemical weapons. They have over 100,000 rockets. They can probably unleash 1,500 to 4,000 rockets a day. That would overwhelm the scenario. At the same time, other things are going on. Arabs advising Abbas to accept Trump peace plan or risk losing out. Now, I don't know what the Trump peace plan is. It hasn't been released yet. There are reports in the press, but they come from the Arab press and people that are, frankly, trying to make Trump look bad. But I suspect it will say we've got to divide up the land and we need to split Jerusalem. Things don't go well for us when we do that. And I'm concerned about that. Abbas is, I would say the same thing if it was, you know, from the other party. If it was the other party, it would be no question it was going to be done. But I'm very concerned about it. This is from the Ayatollah Khomeinis blog. If the world of Islam wants to achieve dignity, it has to stand up against Zionism and Christian America. The little Satan and the big Satan in Khomeini speak. Our confrontation against Takfiri forces was a confrontation against oppression and distortion of Islam. It was a fight against a savage group which knew nothing about Islamic morality and civility and about the truth of Islam. I mean, this is dripping with irony. They used to burn and skin people alive, and they used to take Muslim families captive. They were engulfed by all kinds of corruption, including political, sexual, financial, and practical corruption. They were the agents of the U.S. and Zionism and their cohorts and followers. So what do you say, take away from that? It's the Jews. It's always the Jews that cause all the problems in the world. This is no different than what Hitler said. It's just now coming about. This was also in his blog this week. Shia and Sunni are unanimous in acknowledging Lady Fatima's virtues. Catholic, apparition of Mary accepted by Islam? Let's see, you have a leftist pope who's more of a leftist socialist than he is a Catholic. You have the head of one of the major the Islamic Republic of Iran saying, we accept some of this Catholic stuff. You see how that's why I say I think it's the red-green alliance is how this final beast empire is going to play out. The U.S. was in Israel this week with some major drills. I did a little bit of a deeper dive. Well, here's Putin, Rouhani, and Erdogan to meet for talks in April. That is, at least the way some people look at it, that's Ezekiel 38 right there. They just have to have Libya and Sudan, and guess what? Russia's working on both of those areas too, to bring them on board. And Mohammed bin Salman came out and said that Turkey's the threat of evil. You know, it's interesting, this is where I did a little bit of a deeper dive. This is Prime Minister Hariri of Lebanon. Now, he's an interesting guy. This is a picture of him. He went to Saudi Arabia back in, I think this was November, and he was essentially, it's not really covered that much in the mainstream press, but I kind of dug through some sources, and he was essentially put under house arrest in Saudi Arabia and forced to resign as the head of the government of Lebanon. And I mean, they took away his cell phone and other things, and when diplomats went to see him in Saudi Arabia, he always had Saudi guards there, and they tried to get the Saudi guards away from him. He said, no, they have to stay, or they can stay. He's a dual citizen of both Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. Did you know that? And the report in Depka this week, and I think it's accurate, was that just like the other Saudis that were swept up in this corruption probe by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as they call him, Hariri's family paid $7 billion to the Saudi treasury out of their personal fortune to get him released. So he went back to, he went back to Lebanon. He went back, his return to Lebanon about a month later. He rescinded his resignation. A lot of people are not sure, like, what was Saudi Arabia trying to accomplish by doing this with Hariri? And I think Saudi Arabia was trying to accomplish something, but I think they failed miserably. And what they were trying to accomplish was they were trying to get the Arabs in Lebanon to rise up against Hezbollah. And the only thing that's happened is that the Crown Prince failed at what he wanted to do, and Hezbollah is now stronger than ever. And again, I think that plays into Bible prophecy. Here's Hariri again returning. At the same time this is going on, this is from Foreign Affairs, the remarkable scale of Turkey's global purge. I doubt that you've read about this, but this is sort of a public policy globalist one world order forum, the Council on Foreign Relations and their publication, Foreign Affairs. But Turkey, now they document, has gone into 46 countries to purge individuals out of that country, and they're working with Western democracies in many cases to go in and get people and take them back to Turkey where they'll never be heard from again. It's happening. 46 countries. People. And Erdogan wants to be the Sultan. He wants to revive the Ottoman Empire. And he's moving into Syria to do that. It's a pretty stunning thing. It says here, finally, the global purge by Turkey further erodes hopes that the end of the Cold War and expansion of the liberal order would result in democratic consolidation. Stunning. Listen to this. This was at the Munich Security Conference about 2 weeks ago now. The man that you'll see speaking, of course, you see our former Secretary of State there. The lady on the right, she's from the BBC. The guy immediately to her right, your left, is the special representative of the UN to Syria. I think he's from Sweden or Denmark. He's got a name with too many consonants, not enough vowels, so that's how I figured that out. And Kerry, and then the guy next to Kerry's left, your right, is from Russia. The guy all the way here on the left is the defense minister of Lebanon, and this guy that's going to speak is from Turkey. And they talk right after Netanyahu. They have this panel about the widening gulf in the Middle East, and this guy is going to talk about what he thinks is the solution to all the problems in the Middle East. And I want you to think, as you know the importance of Israel and Jerusalem and Bible prophecy, listen to what this guy says and tell me that we're not living at that time.
What we know for a fact, that thanks to Mr. Netanyahu, we froze our butts outside, and he reminded us what the meaning of refugee means, what it means to be outside your country for 70 years in the freezing death. The idea is to remind you what Secretary General Guterres said. We're not talking about Middle East. We're not talking about widening Gulf. We're talking about global Middle East. And global Middle East means everybody is involved, and means that there is no makeshift solution for Kurds or for Shia or for Palestinians. It is time, if you really believe that you want to make peace, it is time to sit and solve the whole issue. And the whole issue, in my book, starts with Palestine. Whether you declare it a capital or not, this is totally your internal affairs. But you cannot deny that 4 billion persons on earth today turn to Palestine and to Jerusalem saying, this is also my capital. And before we look at the whole image, I do not believe that makeshift solutions, temporary agreements, temporary arrangements, makeshift solutions, help this one against this one, help this one in Lebanon, be against him in China, help this faction in Syria, be against it in Iran or in Iraq. What is most important, and this is the message I'm sending to you, we in Lebanon are a small country, and I need to tell you what I heard in this conference. It's always the big country that voices concern about its security and its threat from a small appendix which is stuck in his side. It is time for the big countries to say, I am part of this, and I am part of the solution.
Well, and I misspoke. He is the defense minister of Lebanon, where Hezbollah is in effective control of the government. So look, just a couple more things and I'll be finished here. This is also from a current issue of Foreign Affairs, talking about Iran among the ruins. This is Persia exerting influence in Syria. One of the ways that they're exerting this influence, this is from Ryan Morrow from the Clarion Project. At least he retweeted this the other day, and this is Aleppo, to show you what Assad has done. Because a lot of people, even I've heard Christians say, well, Assad's okay, there's nothing wrong with this guy. Assad is a thug. Putin is a thug. Iran is a thug. You just, they always, I've heard people say, well, the only countries that don't have a central bank are North Korea, Iran, and Cuba. Okay, go live there then. Enjoy yourself, Send us a picture if they ever get internet that you can use. And so there's a lot of, look, there's a lot of bad people. We supported the United States has supported bad people in the Middle East. But this is the city of Aleppo. And the Central Park area of Aleppo was never touched. Assad and Putin bombed all that rest. Why? Why did they bomb that? And this is repeated over and over. I hope you've seen the videos about the destruction in Damascus and Aleppo and Homs. These cities are rubble. Over half of the Syrian people since 2011 do not live where they lived in 2011. They've been forced migrated to other places. Those were all Sunni areas. And the Alawites that Assad comes from, which are sort of like a Shia sect, they want to get rid of the Sunnis. So what did? They dropped barrel bombs on them. Look at what they destroyed in Aleppo. But they left the Central Park, of course, because Assad likes that. It's just stunning. And so Israel is at the place where they're going to have to make a decision. There are a couple good articles. There's this article on a blog by Vic Rosenthal, Abu Yehuda, Notes on Our Next War. And then Martin Sherman wrote at Aretz Shiva, Israeli National News, about the perils of postponing preemption. And the question they ask is, everybody knows that there's war coming. A lot of people think it's going to be coming very, very soon. Most people would say certainly this year. Is it Ezekiel 38? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But I'm just saying is all the players are kind of lining up that way. But Sherman and this Vic Rosenthal, there's like, what do we do? What does Israel do? When we tried to preempt attacks, we had the great victory of 1967. They were going to get attacked. They just pulled Israel struck first. 1973, they waited, and the results were not that good. They went into Lebanon in 2006, and the results were so-so. I mean, you drive along the border now, you can see the Hamas and Lebanon and the Iranian flags and that type of thing right there on the border of Israel. This is what the Bible predicts will happen in the end times. It's an amazing thing. Somebody said, well, you've taught, I've been teaching this for a long time, and what do you do? Oh, there's one other thing, and I'll close with this. This was the front page of the Jerusalem Post this morning. Now, a lot of people portray Putin as this great Christian, right? They do. I hear Christian news people do this because he supports the Russian Orthodox Church, and they're just the same as evangelicals and blah, blah, blah. Here's what Putin said this, and by the way, the person who says that, if you want to know, I'll tell you afterwards, but he is virulently anti-Jewish. Virulently anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist. And he mocks people that believe Israel has any importance in the end times. Well, this was from the UN Human Rights Council report. Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria are a war crime. And this from the front page of the Jerusalem Post this morning, Putin, Jews may have been behind U.S. election interference. So what we see is, look, all the nations are lined up on the borders of Israel, the ones that are prophesied in the Bible. Is this it? I can't say for sure. I'm just saying Jesus said when you start to see all these things, there's conflicts. I could go on, and if you ever listen to me, I could go on and on and on and on. All of these conflicts, there's all over the world, there's wars and rumors of wars. Everywhere you look. And we're having effectively, my opinion, a civil war in our country. It's a war over values right now. It's unmistakably clear. So it's a very difficult time. The pressure is on the church at all times. So let me make this suggestion. Let me read a passage to close. The Psalms are very comforting. They're also very troubling, but they're telling you the truth. Psalm 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said, thou art my son. This day I have begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, capital S-O-N, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little bit. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. That is the only hope, is trust and faith in Jesus Christ. Remember that, Pastor.